Hello, and welcome to the group project for History 306's The Civil War in a Global Perspective, Group 2 for Charles Dickens. Charles John Huffman Dickens was born on February 7, 1812, and died on June 9, 1870. Primarily an author, he was widely regarded as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era, whose works included A Christmas Carol, A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, and David Copperfield. In addition to his writing, he was also a prominent social critic and proponent of the children's right and education in his home country of England, as well as an outspoken abolitionist. While traveling through the U.S. South in 1842, Dickens engaged in many debates with aristocratic slave owners, who often sought his opinion on the quote-unquote peculiar institution. Though many slave owners agreed with his views on the ills of industrial capitalism, like increased crime and poverty, the issue of slavery would always be a point of contention between Dickens and his southern U.S. audience, who felt the writer was out of line for openly criticizing slave society after only one trip to the United States. Dickens felt, like many abolitionists on both sides of the Atlantic, that slavery led to a depressed economy, the devaluation of work, and cultural backwardness. Dickens claimed that after actually seeing slaves being auctioned in Washington, D.C., it furthered his indignation against the bondage of African American human beings. Prior to the outbreak of the war in the United States, Dickens had held a relatively neutral view. His main points of contention were his hatred of slavery and the copyright issues that he had with the Union. However, this changed between 1861 and 1862 after he read The American Union, its effects on national character, and the policy with an inquiry into secession as a constitutional right and the causes of disruption by James Spence. At this point, Dickens' loyalties skewed towards the Confederates, leaning on arguments given by Spence. Dickens saw the U.S. Civil War as an inevitable conflict because of the conflicting Northern and Southern lifestyles, and that the secession of the Confederacy was predicted early in the 19th century by thinkers like Thomas Jefferson and Alexis de Tocqueville. He often likened that Northerners and 17th century English Puritans espousing the principles of hard work and thriftiness, while comparing Southerners to reckless cavaliers, who loathed hard work and delighted in having slaves work the land for free. Despite his support for the Union cause, Dickens often hinted that European Americans in the North loathed African Americans as much as the slaveholding South. Up until the end of the Civil War, he claimed that the conflict ensued because of the economic issues between the two warring factions, and that there was little or no actual Northern humanitarian impulse to ameliorate the plight of the enslaved African Americans. As is illustrated by Andre Flesch in the Revolution of 1861, American citizens had very complicated beliefs about their Civil War. Those who supported the Union tended to believe that there was a fight against the aristocracy and extreme financial inequality that led to similar conflicts in Europe. Southerners not only were able to gain financial superiority over their northern countrymen through their vast plantations, but political power through the Three-Fifths Clause. Supporters of the Confederacy, on the other hand, believed that they were warding off attacks from an unjust and overreaching central government, whose actions flew in the face of the American Revolution itself. Few on the other side engaged with the morality of slavery as an institution, instead favoring a political and economic view of the fight. This was shared for the most part by Charles Dickens. However, while Americans on both sides of the war framed their cause with a decidedly noble bent, Dickens reacted with scorn. He made no allusions to the greater purpose for the fight, instead saying the real issue was the tariff, casting the Union as an overbearing tax collector that taxed the South almost abominably for its own advantage. In this way, his view of the Civil War was much more in line with the Southern beliefs from the beginning, despite his early expressions of regarding the evils of slavery. Understanding Charles Dickens' view of the American Civil War is important because it shows the complicated and often contradictory beliefs of people around the globe, as well as driving home the war as a global event. Dickens, arguably one of the most important and widely read authors of all time, not only had his views about the conflict in America, but those views were expressed and distributed to the Americans themselves. His views on slavery, as strongly as they were held, were not enough to attract his sympathies for the Union cause. Instead, he, like the other Southerners, viewed the North as a power-hungry and unjust institution, bent on political domination. Yet despite his obvious disdain for America as a whole, Dickens retained immense popularity among American readers after the war was over. Like many of other significant European figures, people on both sides were able to take what they wanted from him. Southerners latched onto his characters such as Pip from The Great Expectations. Northerners were able to point to his hatred of slavery as his solidarity with their cause. He was so well thought of that he was referred in the newly United States as the British novelist of the century. The fact that he was able to take a successful farewell tour of America in the years following the Civil War shows us not only the level of popularity he held, but the way in which the world had become globalized during the conflict. In a war that found justification in rebellions across Europe, it was only fitting that he drew inspirations from one of Europe's most prominent authors.